Welcome. You are listening to the Fat and Furious podcast. In this podcast series, your host, Steve Bennett, father of 7, best-selling author and adventurer, will be joined by 23 of the world's most forward-thinking medical professionals. Doctors, authors, and top nutritionists, where he'll share the truth behind living healthier and happier for longer.
In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Peter Brukner. Peter Brukner in 2010 was appointed head of medical at Liverpool FC. He's also worked with the Australian cricket team and also the Australian football team. Now, he's a big advocate of the low-carb diet, and especially the low-carb diet in terms of sport and sport performance. He also has a not-for-profit arm called SugarByHalf.
Peter, thank you for joining us. Now, lots of people will know you because you're pretty famous in the sports world, but a lot of our people listening to our podcasts are, just Joe Blogs in the UK that wants to get healthy, that may be a little bit overweight, that is fed up of all that nonsense advice that we're receiving around what we should be eating from our government and so on. But before we jump into the sports world, tell us a little bit about yourself. And then throughout the hour, I'll just seed some of the things we'll talk about. I'd like to find out some stories about sports people and what they eat. I'd like to know a little bit more about your charity, which I believe is about cutting down sugar in Australia. So I want to find out more about your charity. I want to hear some stories. But let's start off with telling everybody a little bit about your own story.
Okay, well, I'm an Australian, obviously, and born and bred in Melbourne, which is a lovely city, and that's where I'm speaking from tonight. I've had a couple of stints in the UK, but I basically went to school and university in Melbourne, graduated as a doctor, then came over to England to practice on the POMs for a few years. So I did 3 years in London in my sort of around the age of 30 late 20s, and loved that. Loved living in London, and I'd work for 12 months and then go off and travel for 3 or 4 months until the money ran out, and then come back and work again. And it was a great 3 years. Came back to Melbourne then. Always fascinated by sport. Sport was always my interest, my obsession. I'd sort of always read the back page of the paper before the front page. And in fact, I always thought when I was younger that I'd know when I'd finally grown up is when I started to read the front page first, but hasn't happened yet. But one day maybe. So sport was always my interest, and I was at average sort of sport. Wasn't particularly good. I was okay at lots of sports and played lots of sports, but it became pretty clear to me, that I certainly wasn't going to represent Australia in cricket or any other sort of sport, but played a lot of sport. And so everyone sort of assumed that I'd want to go into sports medicine. And when I became a doctor, and sports medicine didn't really exist when I sort of got back to Australia. And so I started off in general practice, but more and more of my general practice became sport. So I took the plunge and opened up a sports medicine clinic, and away I went. And had a great time. The clinic went really well. We had lots of doctors and physiotherapists and massage therapists, podiatrists, psychologists, nutritionists, all that sort of stuff. And then I also worked with a bunch of teams, professional sporting teams in Australia, Aussie rules teams, and so on. And then a bunch of national sporting teams, our Australian hockey team, swimming, athletics, soccer and cricket. So five teams. So along the way, we did a couple of Olympics, Atlanta Olympics and Sydney Olympics with the athletics team. Did quite a lot of media work in sport. And then I took on the job as the doctor of the Australian soccer team. We call them the Socceroos. And went through a World Cup qualification with them and went to the World Cup in South Africa in 2010. And from there, I went straight to Liverpool. And I'd been appointed the head of sports medicine and sports science at Liverpool. So I went there.
When you say Liverpool, you're talking rowing or basketball or football?
Oh, Liverpool. Apparently they have a football team. Yeah, but in those days wasn't much good, but now it's pretty good. So that's right. So I had a fascinating couple of years at Liverpool. Crazy time at Liverpool. Changing owners and changing managers and changing coaches. And anyway, 2010 to 2012. Then after I left Liverpool, I worked with the Australian cricket team for 5 years. Did 51 tests in a row and lots of tours and lots of time on the road. And finished up with them a couple of years ago, well before their little indiscretions in South Africa, which you may have heard of in England. They were naughty boys, and
that actually made the front of the newspaper as well as the back of the newspaper.
Yeah, well, you always have to have a quick look at the front, because if it's a really big sporting story, it'll be on the front, but then you flip it over. So they were clearly missing my moral guidance when I left. So the last couple of years, I've been focusing on public health issues. So I guess my life really sort of changed towards the end of my time at Liverpool. And if you sort of asked me then, was I healthy, I'd have probably said, I'm fine. But the reality was I wasn't particularly healthy. I was quite overweight, borderline obese. Like many sort of middle-aged men, I was 60 at the time, like many middle-aged men, and I consider 60 middle-aged. I used to think it was very old, but now I think it's middle-aged. I'd probably put on, half a kilogram a year, pound a year for 30 years, to the point where I'm probably 15 kilograms overweight, BMI of 30, in the obese range and so on. And, my kids are starting to poke me in the guts and say, come on, Dad, what about it? And I'd say, well, I'm on a good diet. I'm on a low-fat diet. I exercise regularly. It's not my fault. And I also had a bunch of other medical issues. I had a thing called a fatty liver. I had high triglycerides, high insulin. So I was clearly pre-diabetic, and my father had developed type 2 diabetes at around the same age, and I clearly didn't want to go down that track. I saw what happened to him. So around about that time, I started hearing, a few sort of people challenging the idea that maybe fat was the problem with our diet, and people suggesting that maybe it was sugar and carbohydrates that were the issue. In particular, Tim Noakes, who many of your listeners would know, I'm sure. And Tim's an old friend of mine from the sports medicine world. We've known each other for 30 years, and always had plenty of banter about cricket and rugby and South Africa, Australia, and so on. And Tim sort of had come out and said, he thought that we'd been wrong, that low fat, was not the way to go, and he'd reduced his carbs and it made an enormous difference to his health. And to be honest, if it had been anyone else saying it, I'd have ignored it and said, they're crazy. But because Tim, super smart guy, probably the smartest guy I know, I think, and he'd been proven right. He'd challenged a few other things in sports science, and he'd always been proven right. So I thought, I need to look into this. This is very interesting. So I read a book by Gary Taubes, I'm sure also many of your listeners would know, called Good Calories, Bad Calories, or The Diet Delusion, I think it was called in the UK.
That's right.
And this book just blew me away. I mean, because it not only sort of talked about the relative merits of carbs and fats, but talked about the politics, about how sort of the low-fat movement had won the political war against the low-sugar movement back in the sort of 60s and 70s, which I'd always assumed was on the basis of good science, but very naively. It turned out it was more about politics and money and ego and power and so on. So this book just blew me away. I remember, putting it down at night thinking, no, this couldn't be right. Like, we couldn't have got this wrong. The whole of the Western, world has been on this low-fat diet for 30 years. And here's this guy suggesting there's no evidence for it. And I found it really disturbing. So I then plunged into everything I could possibly get my hands on. I read, 30 books and hundreds of articles. And the more I read, the more worried about I got and the more disturbed I got. And I thought, no, this couldn't be right. Like we couldn't possibly have stuffed this up. So I thought, okay, well, it's time for a bit of research, Now, I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor, we like to do research. But we also know that research with an N=1 is a waste of time, but except when the one is yourself. So in which case, it's very important. So I decided it was time for an N=1 experiment. Not particularly scientifically valid, but pretty important to me. So I decided I would do 3 months of a low-carb, healthy fat diet. So did all my blood tests on day one, got into this diet, no sugar, no starches, no rice, no pasta, no potato, no bread, cereals, no vegetable oils, no processed foods, basically. And the only fruit I had was berries, green veg, meat, fish. And so I went back to eating probably the way that my grandparents had eaten. Lots of meat, fish, eggs. Eggs have been demonised for 30, all that cholesterol and so on, and dairy, full-fat dairy, threw away all the low-fat stuff, and went back to, threw away the margarine, went back to butter and so on. And as I said, the only fruit, berries, green, nuts, olive oil, and that was it. So I did this for 3 months. So lots of things happened. The first thing that happened was I stopped being hungry. So instead of, I would normally get up and have my cereal in the morning and then, get to about 10 o'clock in the morning and think, God, it must be lunchtime soon, I'm starving. I'd have my bacon and eggs or an avocado or whatever for breakfast, and I wouldn't be hungry all day. So I went from eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to probably eating 2 meals a day. And I still eat 2 meals a day now. If I got hungry during the day, I'd have some nuts or some cheese or something. But basically, I just have 2 meals a day. Then I started to lose weight. Every week I'd jump on the scales, and I thought the first week, just fluid or beginner's luck and so on, but I just kept losing weight. The more fat I ate, the more fat I lost. It was just bizarre. And then I had so much more energy. I concentrated better. I slept better. I stopped snoring. That was a very popular move. Happy wife, happy life.
In fact, your friend Tim Noakes said exactly the same. He said, He said, I was noticing all the symptoms when I stopped eating the carbs. He said, but the thing that made my life the best was I stopped snoring.
Exactly, yeah. It was always been a big snorer. And yes, and my energy and my exercise tolerance improved. I remember being on the treadmill once, during that period and thinking I could run forever, and I sort of never had that feeling before. So at the end of that 3 months, I'd lost 13 kilograms in 13 weeks.
Wow.
Being hungry, eating really well, enjoying every meal, eating lovely, meat and fish and dairy and eggs and things. All my medical issues resolved. My fatty liver that I'd had for at least 10 years, completely resolved. My insulin went down to normal, my triglycerides normalised, everything normalised. The one negative was I needed a new wardrobe because I'd lost so much weight. But I figured that was a small price to pay.
And isn't that fascinating? Because you must have, in those sort of 20 years, you're around national sports teams, you're around Liverpool FC, where there must be the choice of food, everybody thinking they're eating healthily anyway. Your options must have always been, a quality of bad quality, I guess. But it was just the wrong food.
Yeah. I always thought I was doing the right thing, and lots of pasta and rice and bread and all the things that we were encouraged to eat. And
does that make you angry at all, furious at all?
Absolutely, really angry and very disillusioned with science, with medicine, with my profession. But in a way, you sort of can't blame doctors because we get no nutrition training at all. I didn't have a single lecture on nutrition in my medical course, and things haven't improved much. So as doctors, we stay, and we all do, we stay in our comfort zone. And our comfort zone is drugs and surgery and so on. And we don't know anything about nutrition or exercise. So you can see why we don't go down that track, because if you don't know about something, you don't go with it. So yeah, at the end of that, I if I needed any more convincing, then I certainly was convinced, and I guess since then I've tried to do everything I can to spread that word. I guess when you discover something that you think is very important, you've got two choices. You can either just sort of keep it to yourself and say, oh well, lucky me, I know what's going to keep me healthy. But I sort of felt really duty bound to sort of go out there and try and just tell the world about this stuff, and not as if I invented it, but, I discovered it for myself and I wanted to tell as many people as possible. And that's basically what I've been doing the last 7 years.
That's exactly what we're trying to do with the podcast, Peter. I was the same as you. I slowly got more and more obese. And I'd run marathons, I'd trek to the North Pole, I'd done loads of crazy sports things. And I was fat. And it was only when exactly the same as yourself, borderline diabetic, and then somebody said, well, you're eating all the wrong stuff. Why are you avoiding fat? Why are you eating cereals? Why are you eating baked potatoes every night. I went, because that's what I'm told to eat. And so my new book and this podcast series is called Fat and Furious, because I spent all my adult life overweight. And I'm furious because actually it's so simple that once you learn what you've learned, and what I've learned, is you want to spread the word, because it actually isn't difficult once you know the truth.
No, that's right. And
tell me about
everyone was right.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the sports stories then, because I've been listening to some of your. Well, first of all, I saw you speak at the PHC last year with your Liverpool scarf around, which was fascinating. And one of my highlights from that, which I wrote in my recent book, was you told me about that one state in America, the real rice growers growing grain rice got so annoyed because cauliflower rice was becoming so popular and turning people's illnesses around using cauliflower rice that they actually banned it being called rice at all. So I remember you saying that. But tell me some of the stories then, because I know you've helped quite a lot of sports people now change their diets.
Well, sports people have probably had the worst diets of anyone. I mean, they've been so carbohydrate centric, if you like. All the pasta parties and the sports drinks, Gatorade and Powerade and Lucozade, and I mean, in a way, they've almost had the worst diets of anyone. The massive amounts of sugars and simple carbohydrates in particular, and gels and bars and so on. So, I really worry about the long-term effect that will have had on their health. We've had a whole generation of sports people who have been massive carbohydrate, intake. So that's a concern just from a general health point of view. But the reason, we've all been pushing, and I was as guilty as anyone, was been pushing carbohydrates because we thought that was the best source of, or the only source of energy for someone who's doing exercise. And I think, it's become pretty evident that there is a very realistic alternative to that, and that's fat or ketone bodies. And, the great advantage of that is that you've got an unlimited supply of that, because you've got lots of body fat. Even the skinniest person has enough body fat to fuel them for hours. And one of the problems with athletes, of course, is having to refuel the whole time. You run a marathon or you run an Ironman or something like that, you're constantly having to replenish your carbohydrate supply because you run out, and you famously hit the wall in a marathon. I'm sure many people could relate to that. So the great advantage of fueling yourself from fat is that you don't hit the wall. It's a very constant sort of source of fuel. So more and more athletes, I guess, over the last few years have been switching from a high carbohydrate diet to a low carb, sort of higher fat diet, and basically using ketones or ketogenic diet or keto diet, using ketones as their fuel source. We've got two fuel sources. We've got sugar or glucose or fats and ketone bodies, and the body will always use glucose preferentially because the body perceives glucose as a danger. High amounts of glucose in the blood is a danger, so works to move it out of the blood into the muscles and so on. But if the glucose is not there in your blood, the body will switch to fats and to ketone bodies, and they're also a very effective fuel. The only area probably where carbohydrates are better would be in high intensity exercise. Some people, a lot of people, when they're on a keto diet, can struggle with high intensity exercise. So, I see a lot of, say, people like cyclists or runners who say, yeah, I'm good, all the time, but, if I just need to sprint or climb or something like that, I just feel as though I need a few carbohydrates. So people have been playing around now for the last years with different diets and different amounts of carbohydrate, or challenging what we've been doing for the last 50 years, really.
Yeah, and really, really interesting, isn't it? Do you think that some of those high intensity ones, it's just that because I guess the carbs hit faster, that just in a few instances there's still maybe a need for it. But having said that, Tim Noakes just done some research and put a white paper out talking about, that's not really HIIT, but he was saying that on a 5 kilometre run, there was no difference on those having carbs or high fat, that it almost made no difference what the diet was to the outcome of the speed.
Yeah, look, I think by and large that's the case. I think maybe at a very elite level, at a very high intensity they might. But again, I think it's a lot of conditioning and what you're used to and what you expect and so on. So, I think the vast majority, certainly all recreational athletes and all ultra endurance athletes, are absolutely fine on ketogenic diet. So there's no problems on low carb there. It just may be so. I know a lot of the football teams now and elite sporting teams around the world are sort of doing a bit of a mixture of the sort of doing this train low, compete high. So during the week they'll be very low in carbohydrates and maximise their fat oxidation. And then maybe on match day they'll just top up with a few carbs just to give them that extra sort of energy burst and so on. So, but it's very individual. I think there's a right amount of carbs for every person, and it's just a little bit of trial and error really. That some people maybe need a few more than others, but by and large, we certainly don't need the massive amount of carbs that people have been eating all this time. So.
Absolutely.
We've had some good experience. The interesting thing with a lot of one of the amazing things about athletes is that despite training as much as they do, so many athletes are a little bit overweight. There might be 2 or 3 kilograms overweight, and despite training all day and so on, and that's largely because of this diet that they've all been on. And it's amazing how often you'll get when you switch athletes from basically a carbohydrate diet to more of a fat oxidation, that they'll lose these 2 or 3 kilograms, and which they've never been able to lose. They don't lose any muscle mass; it's just fat they lose. So their power to weight ratio improves, and they significantly improve their performance. So it's fascinating, and those who've tried it find it have had a lot of success with it. So. Yeah, we did a lot of work with that with the Aussie cricket team. A number of them, were surprisingly, struggling with their weight, and they were able to much better control their weight by reducing their carbohydrate intake, and without any effect on their endurance or anything like that. So it really took me a surprise.
Sorry, Peter. Talking the cricket team, there was a great story. I can't remember which interview I saw you talking about one that had a knee problem and reducing carbs. Could you share with my listeners that story?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're actually in India, and it was just after I lost all my weight. And one of our players, he was sort of in the squad but not in the team, and then he had a lot of knee pain, and he'd really struggled. He'd actually had to stop playing a year or two before I met him, and he'd been no one could work out what was going on with him. And eventually he saw a specialist in Sydney, I think, and who felt he had an unusual form of arthritis, what we call a seronegative arthritis, which is basically like rheumatoid arthritis, very similar. And put him on some pretty powerful drugs, methotrexate and prednisolone initially, which are quite strong. That helped him a little bit, but not completely. And then they put him on a fairly new, very expensive, powerful drug that reduces or improves immunity. And when I met him, he was on that drug. He was able to train, not fully, but enough to be able to play. The coaches thought he was lazy because he just couldn't train fully. And when I met him, he was injecting himself with this drug, Enbrel, which was perfectly, legal and so on. I'm not suggesting it wasn't, but he was injecting himself with that drug every 2 weeks. And he said to me at about day 10 or 11 of the fortnight, he would start to get an ache in his knee, and he'd know it was time to have his injection, and he'd inject it and he'd be then good for a couple of weeks. He was another one of these athletes who was a little bit overweight. So he came to me and said, look, I've seen it, how much weight you've lost, Doc, and I'd like to lose, I reckon I've got 3 or 4 kilograms that I should lose. I'd like to try your diet, as he called it. And basically said, sure. So he went on to a low carb, healthy fat diet, which in India, as we were at the time, it's not the easiest thing to do, no rice and no naan and all those lovely things. But anyway, he was very, very committed to it, very strict, and went strictly low carb and so on. And 3 weeks later, he came to me and said, Doc, I forgot to take my drug last week. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I didn't get any pain in my knee, so I forgot to take it. Do you think I should take it now? And I pretended that was exactly what I'd expected. Of course, yes, I knew that'd happen, but not. But I said, no, why don't you just wait and see what happens? Anyway, no more drugs. Stop taking the drug. The drug costs about £8,000 a year to the taxpayer. So one of those really expensive, high-powered, newish drugs. And he went completely off that. He was able to increase his training. A year later, he'd gone from being outside the team. A year later, he was one of the top 10 batsmen in the world. And he's been pretty good ever since. So that really sort of opened my eyes to the fact that inflammation, basically he had inflammation. And we now understand more and more that inflammation seems to be at the core of just about every disease, this chronic low-grade inflammation that even is atherosclerosis and even mental health and so many things seem to be due to chronic inflammation. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that diet can really affect inflammation. And it seems that sugars and processed foods, vegetable oils, and in a lot of people, grains are the things that cause inflammation. And I've had a lot of success in the last few years reducing people's inflammatory conditions, whether they be arthritis or tendinitis or all sorts of different things, chronic pain even. There's a feeling that infertility might be due to chronic low-grade inflammation. As I mentioned, depression and anxiety have had very good results looking at ketogenic diet, again, because of inflammation. So inflammation has become a really big factor in medicine. And while diet is not the only thing that affects inflammation, we know that, sedentary behaviour and smoking and alcohol and lack of sun and stress and lots of things that cause inflammation, nearly all of which are in our control. It seems that diet is a very big factor in inflammation, and so reducing the carbohydrates and sugars and the vegetable oils, is really putting people on an anti-inflammatory diet. And rather than having to take drugs, you can solve your inflammatory issues with diet. So that was a real eye-opener for me. I mean, it blew me away. I mean, I pretended I expected it to happen, but I certainly didn't. And ever since then, I've really been fascinated by this whole link between inflammation and diet.
Yeah, no, the more and more, you mentioned some great names, Gary Torbs, who I've spoken to, and Tim recently, and you see that all the things you just mentioned, like sunshine, stress, not drinking too much, obviously not smoking, are all really important. But the one they all seem to keep coming back to, almost as like the pivotal point, is this inflammation and a real strong link between too much carbs, inflammation, and then driving so many different illnesses, and a big obviously to insulin as well. You mentioned something a moment ago, because we always see these sports stars, they always look super, super fit. But one question I've got is that our football players, and tell me about when you were at Liverpool, they go and have that sort of, in fact, it's not 2 months anymore, it's much shorter in the summer, but they go and have their summer break. So they've been carb loading all the time, they're training really heavily, and then all of a sudden they're chilling out for a month. Is it a battle then to get them back into the fitness at the beginning of a season? And if they went low carb, would that help?
Well, look, I think there are always some people who come back. They're a little bit thick around the waist, certainly, and you can tell that pretty quickly. Usually, A, by looking at them, and B, looking at the first run they do, and they're way behind everyone else. But look, to be honest, I think that's changing a lot. I mean, I think footballers and all sports people are becoming far more professional. The old days of getting out on the booze and eating whatever they like and so on. That's changing, and as sport becomes more and more professional, I think the athletes become more and more dedicated, and so you'll find now that most footballers, when they do go off on their summer break, they'll keep training. Even the cricketers, traditionally, cricketers didn't worry too much about fitness, but now if you go in the off season, they'll all be in the gym and running pretty hard and so on, just because the demands of the sport mean that's necessary. So I think there's been a real change in that area. Certainly, I mean, if you are low carb, it's much easier to sort of keep yourself in shape, and there's you don't put on the weight that you do if you stop exercising and you're eating lots of carbs. So much easier in that regard. But also for the athlete, there are lots of other advantages to being on a low carb, healthy fat diet. I mean, I mentioned the issue before about not having to refuel constantly, so you don't have to keep chugging down drinks and gels and so on when you're on a long run. I think also you recover a lot better. So it's probably related to this inflammation factor that that soreness you get after exercise is significantly reduced when you reduce those foods that cause inflammation. And that's particularly important, you really don't have much recovery time. You've got to play on Sunday and then front up again on Wednesday night or whatever. And so everything you can do to improve that recovery, you have your ice baths and your everything else that you do and so on. But food has now become a really important part of recovery. So, look, I think it's a really fascinating area. We're learning more and more about the role of diet in all sorts of issues, in chronic disease, so it's an exciting time. I think every day something else is coming out and showing that diet can affect our health in some way.
Yeah, and you said something a moment ago, Peter. You said that you're concerned for sports people, and Tim Noakes says the same. He said, because we keep thinking about, and my approach was because I was fat. Let's not be about the bush, I was obese. But Tim's concern is more that a lot of athletes that were toffee, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, they look great because they're doing lots of exercise, they're doing lots of sports, but actually all that inflammation is still going on in the inside, the fatty livers and the fat around the organs, because they're carb loading all the time, and they probably might not realize they've got a problem to the end of the career, when then all of a sudden the weight just piles on because they're carrying on that same diet, but the problem was probably there all along.
Yeah, we always laughed, don't we? We see footballers a few years after their retirement, and they've got a nice pot belly, and we wink and nudge and say, they've been in a good paddock and so on. But I think that's when you're having a huge amount of carbs, you've got to exercise a lot to keep your weight under control. Whereas if you're on a low carb healthy fat diet, that's not an issue. So it's much more sustainable in many ways, and it's a lifestyle, not a diet. You don't have to sort of diet. To me, is sort of something temporary. So I don't like using the word diet. To me, it's just a way of living. This is the way we choose to live, and it's so much healthier than the other way. So.
And you said earlier on as well that medical school, the same in Australia, same in the UK, same in America. Hardly any days and time spent on nutrition. Is that something we should all be lobbying our governments to change in medical schools, that we start looking at prevention rather than cure, or at least?
Well, I think that the whole medical system is wrong. In all of our countries, we don't have a health system. We have an ill health system, and then basically we sit around and we allow people to eat rubbish and sit in their bums and not exercise, and then we wait till they get sick. And then they come into our surgery and we say, come on in, come on in. I've got things for you. I've got drugs, and I've got my surgery friends around the corner and things like that. So. And it's just not sustainable. It's not financially sustainable. The NHS in your country, the Medicare system in my country, the American health system, it can't afford to treat all these chronic diseases that we're. So the only hope for the future of medicine is prevention. And we know that the majority of these chronic diseases that take up all of the doctor's time are preventable by improving lifestyle. The two key things are diet and exercise. And if we get the diet and exercise right, we're going to solve the majority, not all obviously, but the majority of our chronic medical problems. And, the NHS will be able to afford to treat the people who do get sick instead of the situation they're in at the moment. And the cost of medicine is bankrupting countries. It becomes so expensive to, because we're all living longer, but the last 12, 15 years of our lives are all blighted by chronic disease that take up a lot of money and time and so on. So I think it's the only solution, and yet we're so wedded to this idea of treating illness. It's a whole sort of paradigm shift that's very difficult, because as I said, doctors are trained to treat disease. We're not trained to prevent disease.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll keep treating disease because that's what we're good at. That's what we spent, 6 years in medical school learning and all those years training in the hospitals. We're good at it. But, surely it's much better to and it always fascinates me that, when people have a heart attack, they change everything. They'll change their diet and they start exercising and so on. But why do they wait till they have a heart attack? And half the people don't even survive a heart attack, and why don't people, make the change before they have that heart attack and so on? So I really think we've got to change our whole thinking. That's got to be driven by a combination of government, of the medical profession. The medical profession have got to acknowledge that, the current system is not working and we need to change. So that's what we're trying to do.
Doesn't change. Come nicely to your charity or not-for-profit, SugarByHalf. Tell us what the intention was. I think the name says it very well, but tell us what.
Yeah, well, it sums it up pretty well. Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of years ago, a bunch of us were sitting around and just talking about our frustrations, really, in that the message wasn't getting out there, and we felt one of the reasons was the message was confused. That people were confused about what they should be eating. There seem to be so many diets out there. There's paleo and Mediterranean and low carb and Atkins and God knows what else. And so many people were saying to me, look, we're just confused. For years we thought we knew what we should be eating, and now we're totally confused. And I had a thought, well, let's just try and simplify things, rather than sort of argue until the cows come home about, this fat or that fat or whatever. I mean, I thought let's focus on one thing at a time. And the obvious thing is sugar, because that's the one thing that everyone agrees on. I mean, even the dietitians agree on that sugar is not a good thing. And, in our, Western society, we're probably having 16, 18, 20 teaspoons of added sugar a day. Which is way, way too much. The World Health Organization recommends a maximum of 6. So we're way over the level, and teenagers are having even more. So I just thought, well, let's try and reduce sugar as a starting point. It's not the only problem, but if we got that right, we'd make a pretty big impact. So I also think that campaign should have a target. So I thought, well, let's go with half. World Health Organization says 6 teaspoons. We're having 14, 16. Maths was never my strong point, but it's about half. And so we've started this campaign, awareness. Because a lot of the problem is people don't realise where sugar is. That sugar is in virtually every processed food and things that have been. We always thought were healthy. Things like yogurts and muesli bars and all these sort of things that. We've all, and orange juice and things that for years we thought, well, we're being healthy when we have these things. And they're just full of sugar. So part of what we're trying to do is raise awareness. We have a national campaign that we're hoping to roll out. We have an education program that we started putting into schools this past semester, and that's having a great take up by teachers and so on. We've got a program that we're rolling out early next year in community sporting team clubs and so on to try and get sporting canteens to be healthier, to stop having, sugar snacks at half time and healthy rewards. If you're the best player on the pitch, you don't get your McDonald's voucher. You get a voucher to go to the local recreational centre or something like this. So just change that whole sort of paradigm. So. And we're also trying to tackle the diabetes issue as well, and so because that's really one of the massive problems in our society. I mean, diabetes is the major chronic disease in our societies, and contrary to what everyone says, it's actually reversible. As David Unwin and others have shown that the low carb diet in many cases can reverse type 2 diabetes. So there's some of our messages, and we're trying to push that as much as we can. We've got a great group of people working on it in Australia, and similar to what PHC and so on are doing in the UK, and getting out there with ambassadors in the community and spreading the word, because I really think this is the most important single public health issue in the world. Is diet, and we're getting fatter and sicker every year. We're getting more obese. There's more type 2 diabetes, more chronic disease, And people say, well, what's changed? And the thing that's changed is our diets. And there's more and more sugar and processed foods in our diet. So our message is really reduce your sugar, eat real food rather than processed food. That, if you had to have one line, just go home, open the pantry, throw away all the stuff in packages and cans and so on, and replace it with real food. And, that'll be the single best thing you can do for your family.
That's great advice. And talking of your family, you were saying earlier they used to prod you. Come on, Dad, you're a sports doctor. You advise Liverpool FC and you're overweight. How have your family taken to your changes?
Yeah, well, they would all sort of, they tease me about my devotion to the cult, as they call it. But interestingly, they all eat a lot better than they used to, and I've got a. And I did a terrible job of feeding my children. I have to say, I look back and I think, my God, it's a wonder any of them survived their childhood, to be honest, the rubbish I used to feed them. But
unintentionally. In fact, with a good intentions. I thought I was doing the right thing. Yeah, I wrote an article the other day. I've got 7 kids, and I've always tried to look after my kids, as all parents do. But, I'm very conscientious. I'd buy them apple juice, orange juice for breakfast, the cereals that said they were healthy with all these vitamins added. And now, two of my elder children are battling their weight constantly. They've got it down well now, but, I think I've damaged their metabolism over, their growing up years. And that's why I'm furious, because I thought I was doing the right things, and I'm sure you were the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had one of my children, my youngest, actually got quite obese by the age of about 11 or 12, and he, not surprisingly, like his father, loved sport, and he just couldn't do it. I mean, it was so frustrating. And he actually he took himself off all junk food and started to eat. Nothing to do with me. I'd love to take the credit, but then lost a whole lot of weight and finished up being a top athlete. And I should have realised that at the time, but we're very wedded, as doctors, we tend to sort of believe everything we're taught in medical school, and as someone said, I think Tim might have said this actually, that 50% of everything we're taught in medical school turns out to be wrong. We just have to work out which 50%, and I had the wrong 50% for a long time, and so I've got a grandchild now, and he's I can assure you he's eating very very healthily indeed. So hopefully he'll do a lot better. Trying to make up for my sins of the past.
Well, there would only be a sin if you knew you were doing the wrong thing. Somebody said to me, well, somebody said to me the other day, they said, Steve, if most of these chronic illnesses are because of what we're eating, then are we all committing suicide? I said, well, it's only suicide if you know what you're eating is wrong. So, what you're trying to do, and all the people you mentioned, Tim and David Unwin, are trying to do, is to educate people. Then if they choose to carry on eating carbs, then maybe it is self-harm.
Yep.
I've got one more question going back to the famous cricketer that you helped. So here he was on tour in India with naan bread city and rice everywhere, and to change his health, you were advocating that he stopped eating the naan breads and the rice and started eating more fats. And he did it, and he became healthy, and his knee pain went away. What about the rest of the team? Did that influence their food choices?
Yeah, I think a lot of them got on board. They saw people losing weight, and Davey Warner's another one who I know nobody in England likes Davey Warner, but he's actually a really nice guy. But I don't know whether you remember, but when he first came on the scene, he was quite a pudgy sort of guy, and he completely turned around his fitness, and he's now absolutely ripped and probably the lowest body fat of anyone in the team, and the almost the best athlete in the team now. And so he had a dramatic impact on his body shape and his his ability as well, and so on. So there was a lot of interest to some of them. I mean, most young people can get away with eating pretty much what they like, when they're young. It's only later on it catches up with them. But quite a number of them embraced the low carb concept. Shane Watson was another one he was someone who always battled with his weight, and the only way he loved food, and the only way he could keep his weight under control was by starving himself, and that would make him miserable. And he just battled it for years and years. And And he was quite angry at the end because he discovered low carb and discovered he could actually eat really well and maintain his, keep his weight right. And he used to say to me, Doc, all those years, I've suffered. And so, where were you? And I said, well, I wouldn't have been much use to you then because I didn't know it either. So, we were both on a journey of discovery, but made a huge difference to him. And he was able to, eat enough and eat well and enjoy his food and still keep his weight under control and have good energy levels. So, he was very annoyed.
That's a fascinating story, and it's just amazing, isn't it, that so many of us got it so wrong for so long. Let's change tack a little bit because we are in the UK and we love our cricket. Probably not as much as you do in Australia, probably because normally you beat us. Let's talk about football because that's the main passion here. Give us some stories or a story about Liverpool for the football fans that are watching right now. And of course, at the moment, they're doing very well.
They are. It's fantastic to see. And look, obviously it's an amazing club and an amazing tradition and an amazing city. I love my time in Liverpool. I love the city of Liverpool. It's a great city. And, any city whose two passions are football and the Beatles, can't be a bad place really, can it? So I was very lucky. And I guess, one of the things you constantly need to remind yourself when you're working, you're lucky enough to be working with these amazing athletes. It's except, how privileged you are to be able to work with, the best athletes in the world. We had Steven Gerrard and Luis Suarez, for instance, there. And I mean, people had paid just to go and watch them train. It was, you felt so privileged to be able to be there. And Stevie, is exactly as he said, he's a lovely guy. Fame hasn't changed him. He still hangs around with the same mates he grew up with. He's just a down-to-earth, genuinely nice person, and I don't think everything he's done has changed changed him as a person. And he's someone I really warmed to and admired the whole time. Luis Suarez is a fascinating character. I mean, to all intents and purposes, he's this sort of animal on the pitch and, with his intensity and his, rugged play, I guess, and then he's kept, his tendency to want to bite people and so on. And so, I remember when he first came, he already was under suspension then for biting someone when he was playing for Ajax in Holland. And we thought, oh, God, this guy, he's going to come in, he's going to be this sort of animal guy, it's going to be difficult to deal with. And he arrived and he was just the nicest, gentlest, quiet, family sort of guy. Just walk around with his cup of, Uruguayan tea that he always was drinking and always had a smile on his face, was always friendly and so on. And you think, how could this person, be the same person who's, out on the ground, kicking the crap out of people and biting people and so on. And it was even a training. Like people would hate to play against him at training because he was just so intense and he'd make no excuse. He said, look, you train the way you play. And he was this classic white line fever. I mean, he was a different person as soon as he crossed that white line. And I was glad he was on our side, not on the others. But you could not meet a lovelier guy, a gentler guy off the field. So, it just shows you that the perception we have of people can be so wrong, in some cases. And once you get to know people, athletes are the same as everyone else. They have the same issues, the same insecurities, the same problems with families and, all sorts of things as the rest of us do. They just happen to be incredibly good at something and get paid a ridiculous amount of money. But underneath it all, they're people and they have injuries and they have insecurities and they have issues the same as everyone else. And I think what you learn is that, you treat them as normal people and try to develop relations with them. And I'm very fortunate to work with lots of great athletes, and most of whom have been great people.
It's interesting you talked about Suarez. I cycled last year with the ex-England rugby captain Lewis Moody, and he'd got a reputation, on the pitch for in rugby of being an absolute animal. But I cycled with him, and he was the loveliest giant I've ever met in my entire life. and we took these 25 disadvantaged children all the way around the Alps cycling, and Lewis, we got talking, and he started talking about diet, and I'm always struggling, always having to starve myself. And I went, look, I told him about the low carb, and he just didn't believe it. Just did not believe it. And it's interesting that they apply themselves so much in their sport that I think when they get to know the truth, they've just got to do what you did, which said, look, the evidence is there, or there's certainly people like Tim saying it works. You got to try it for a bit. So I think sports people, because they can apply themselves so well, if they at least give it a go, certainly post-professional career, it's amazing because they can apply themselves that they can probably turn their lives around.
Yeah, let's hope so anyway.
Yeah. Look, it's been absolutely fabulous talking to you. I'm going to ask you the same final two questions that I ask all doctors and professors that come on, and some have the most interesting answers, and some have some really bizarre ones. First thing is, let's start with the simpler question. What is Peter's top 3 or 4 things for helping people live healthier and happier for longer?
Eat real food rather than processed food. Exercise regularly, and have fun.
Have fun. That's a great one. And the final one, which does bring out some strange answers, what would you like your legacy to be?
I hope that people would think that I was able to be a force for good, that I was able to help change the way people ate, and that had a significant impact on their health. And that's what I intend to spend the rest of my time, hopefully quite a few more years, doing.
Well, it's really interesting you've said that, because Lee's just handed me a piece of paper, said, just ask Peter what he's doing now. And I think that's exactly what you're spending your time now, rather than just trying to fix people up, trying to put them on the right path, and trying to do a bit more prevention rather than cure. I tell you what, we talked about earlier on. I know that was supposed to be the last question, but that's just, we've not touched on this one yet. So we both kind of want to change what people are taught at medical school. What's your government's guidelines in Australia on what food we should be eating? Because in the UK, we have this crazy Eat Well guideline. In America, they've got that crazy pyramid. Is it as bad in Australia?
Yep, it is. I mean, they're pretty good on sugar. They agree that sugar is not a good thing, but they don't understand carbohydrates. They don't. They still think that you can have as many starches and so on, and that you're fine. And there's still this lack of understanding of saturated fat and different fats and so on. So, yeah, look, we're in a pretty similar situation to the US and the UK, and it's one of our frustrations, because doctors who don't understand nutrition will then just revert back to, well, that's the guidelines, and they assume that the guidelines are based on science, and largely they're not. The last time they reviewed the guidelines, they deliberately chose not to review saturated fat, because they said, nothing's changed. Whereas there was, I think at that stage, about 5 systematic reviews out already. But they don't want to change, and obviously there are a lot of people in the dietetic world and the nutrition world who don't want things to change, because they've developed their reputation and their practice around a certain paradigm, and they don't want that to be challenged. And I can understand that. I mean, if you've been telling someone for 30 years one particular thing, and then some wacko bloody sports doctors come along and say, you're actually wrong, and everything you've been telling people is wrong, and turn the pyramid upside down. I mean, of course, their response is going to be, aggressive, defensive, and then try and defend their what they want to do. So, we just have to keep working away. And
people defending their corner, Peter. Is that just like with Tim in South Africa? Has that caused you any criticism from people that are trying to protect their views? Or
look, I haven't not quite as bad as Tim suffered, and no one deserves to go through what he did. But no, look, there's a lot of people here who are quite critical of me, and think I've lost my marbles, and they might be right, but on this case, I'm right on this one. So It is interesting, though, that when you get a chance to talk to people and you can get up in front of people and even, general practitioners who are, pretty skeptical and reluctant to embrace new ideas. I speak to groups, some large groups of general practitioners and by and large, they embrace it, because we're actually giving them hope. We're giving doctors and people hope that they can cure these chronic diseases instead of just saying, well, you've got type 2 diabetes, dear. I'm terribly sorry. You've got that for the rest of life. I'll just give you some tablets that might help you a little bit. Here's a way of actually reversing that, and so you're giving doctors hope. So I get a great response when I get the chance to talk to doctors, but unfortunately I don't get to talk to all of them.
Yeah, I mean, your friend Dr. David Unwin said that he almost quit being a GP because he was seeing so many people with diabetes, and before he knew the answer, he just everything's getting more sad, and you see more people getting more desperate, putting on more weight. Yeah, just giving out more, insulin and drugs. And he said, he almost quit being a doctor. In fact, in his practice, he stopped seeing anybody with diabetes because he was just getting so depressed. And then, of course, when he found the answer and the solution, then all of a sudden he enjoyed being a doctor again, because now you're helping people rather than just dishing out medicine. And in fact, quite recently, David's been involved with diabetes.co.uk. And a figure they've just put out is they've just helped over 50,000 people in the UK, and well, not just the UK, but predominantly the UK. 50,000 people put their diabetes in remission. So look how far, because of people like yourself, Tim, David, happy to put your head above the parapet and say, look, I think we all got it wrong as GPs. There is another way. You're really helping so many people now. So, a massive thank you from a layman like myself that's not a doctor, for people like you that are really standing up and changing things. So thank you very much.
No, it's my pleasure. And you mentioned David Unwin. I mean, I think, he's probably doing more good for health in your country than any other single person. He's a wonderful man, and his program is so exciting. So, we all need to get behind him and support him as much as we can, because there are lots of people who want to take him down. So, I admire him enormously.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely fabulous, along with his wife as well. So, look, yep. Peter, thank you for taking the time. I know we're calling you very late in the evening in Australia.
No, that's all right. That's no problems at all. Always happy to chat.
Well, thank you very much, and just keep getting that message out. We'll put some links up to your Half the Sugar campaign, and best of luck with that. And hopefully, we'll see you at some conference in the future.
Yeah, and I look forward to Liverpool winning the premiership and us retaining the Ashes for many more years. Good night.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you right now. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this podcast, then why not subscribe to the full series so you can hear from all the incredible health professionals we spoke to. For the full story, you can also get the book Fat and Furious, written by Steve Bennett, available on Amazon. And to say a huge thank you for watching us here on YouTube, we are even offering you an exclusive Amazon discount code so you can get yourself a copy. For more details, head to the description below.